All right, folks, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to today's presentation on Revit model management using Ideate Software. It is a pleasure to have Gavin Crump with us today, and Gavin is going to be doing most of the presentation here. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. Gavin, if you want to go ahead and advance the next slide. All right, so just real quickly about me, my name is Sash Kazminejad. I am the Customer Success Manager with Ideate Software. I'm located in Portland, Oregon in the US. My background's in architecture. I'm also licensed out of the state of California. Been with Ideate for over 7 years, mostly focused on the Revit platform and of course the Ideate Software platforms as well. And of course, with us is Gavin Crump, and I'm going to let Gavin talk about himself here in just a moment. But before we do that, a couple things I just want to point out to you. There are a couple of handouts that are part of the presentation today. One of them is a brochure on all of our products, all the Ideate Software products, that is. So if you're new to Ideate Software, feel free to download that brochure and have a look. Also, there is a PDF with some quick links to various locations on our website. So if you're new to our products or trying to get started with them, these links will help you get started. The other thing, too, is there's a questions panel on your go-to. During this presentation, I will be fielding the questions and trying to answer them to the best of my ability. But especially if they're technical ones, no problem. But of course, what we're going to do is we'll do a Q&A here towards the end of the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and let Gavin take it from here. Gavin, it's all you.
Thanks, Sash. I'll quickly flick on my camera just to properly say hi to everyone, assuming it pops up. There I am. So it's nice to see everyone here. I've seen a lot of people from around the world registering for this, so it's really exciting. And thanks for supporting myself and Ideate. I'll just hide my camera so I'm not blocking the presentation. But I guess for those of you that haven't met me or heard of me before, I guess now you have, but my name is Gavin Crump. I work as a BIM consultant at my own business, BIM Guru, which I launched at the start of this year. I'm from Sydney, Australia, originally from South Australia, for anyone from Australia that knows the States. I've got a master's and a bachelor's in architecture, and I've worked in almost about 10 years in the AEC industry in Australia as a BIM user, coordinator, manager, and just all-around enthusiast of all things BIM. For anyone that knows me pretty well, I'm pretty nutty about BIM. So I started a little bit later than Sash with Revit. I started predominantly with Revit and Navisworks on a large multi-billion-dollar hospital, which was a great exposure to Autodesk's tools and how they can be used on large-scale projects. But I began in 2012, or at least in that version. So I'm a Revit architecture certified professional, but I'm not a registered architect like Sash. I've spent most of my time focusing on BIM instead with an architectural context. And a lot of you may also know me from YouTube, where I run a relatively successful channel called Aussie BIM Guru, where I make 2 videos typically a week, where I'll share hands-on technical workflows that relate to professional workflows. Which is sort of where a lot of the things I'm going to show you today relate back to. These are real-world workflows that I've used before, using Ideate tools and other workflows as well. So I've got my work and my play. As I said, I've got my business that I started this year. It's been a very interesting year, I won't lie. Actually a very successful year too. So if anyone's looking to become a consultant, it's not a bad time. There has been a lot of digital disruption and change, and that has benefited the position of my business and other consultants as well. I'm predominantly Revit focused, so a lot of the things I show you today will actually be workflows I use with clients or in the day-to-day work related to my business content. And I also run my YouTube channel on the side, and also have a social media presence on relative platforms like LinkedIn. And I'm currently almost at 12,000 subscribers and just about 230 videos, so it's growing pretty quickly, but having a lot of fun just immersing myself in BIM and AEC. So I guess I'll start talking about Ideate Software and I guess my relationship with Ideate. I've used them for quite a while now. I think I first encountered Ideate tools in my 2nd year on the job and was pretty blown away from the start. At this point, there wasn't really anything like Dynamo available, so add-ins were really all we had, and they really have stood the test of time. I still use them to this day, and they still support a lot of my business needs. They're very easy to use, but there's a lot inside them that you can master, which I really like about the tools. They're very deep. They're very clean and navigable. I really enjoy the interfaces that they've developed, and they're constantly updating and improving the user interfaces, but they're highly polished. compared to most of the competition out there, I find. They're also very stable, well supported. There's a team you can call on very regularly that will have a deep knowledge of their tools. A lot of their staff have been there a very long time supporting these tools as well. I find that they have some really great import and export features, typically going to Excel in particular, which is a great environment for data processing. And there's a lot of getting started content available. The tools don't really come empty. They come with a lot of predefined templates and types of things you can use to generate a lot of data sets from your models. So I'm going to be focusing on how I use Ideate Software in the context of data and model management, and also in the maintenance or changing of project standards. As everyone knows, the larger the projects get with BIM, the more complex these three things become. And I do find that Ideate has been really critical in being able to scale my workflows up to the large scale projects. Anyone that uses Dynamo, for example, will know that you will reach a point where you can't really achieve the same speed or depth that a tool like Ideate offers me. I'm going to be using two models today. These aren't client models, so if any of my clients are watching, don't worry, I'm not showing them your private projects. These are actually two remakes that I've built based on my own personal content standard, the BIM Guru content. You may recognize these as the basic and the advanced sample projects, but they're fully remade. The one at the top is actually available on my website. So in future, if anyone's following along and using the Ideate tools, feel free to download that for free. And the one below will come at a later date on my course platform. So I'm going to begin just by focusing sort of one tool at a time, but focusing on the major ones that give me the most I can work with. Ideate BIMlink is predominantly an import-export tool that mostly works with Excel. And I find this tool really handy for data processing and Revit element management. So I'm going to show you a few things I use it for. Without further ado, I'm actually just going to jump into a model. So I've just got, in this case, my basic project available. Sorry, I'll just maximize this. And I've also got my advanced project in this case. So when I say I'm in my advanced project, I'm actually in the internal component of a work shared model that's built of a few links at the same time. So, but in the basic project, I'm in a non-work shared model, which is a slightly smaller and more manageable scale, but still a relative amount of detail sort of lurking beneath the scenes in the model. So I'm going to start just by looking at the advanced sample project. And I'm going to begin by having a look at Ideate BIMlink. So on my software panel or my manage tabs, you can see each of the Ideate tools sort of laid out. There's quite a few of them, but some of them really do contain quite a lot of depth. Like BIMlink, for example, has hundreds of pre-configured links you can work with. So you're going to see quite a lot of depth just lurking in these little buttons. So I'm just going to boot up BIMlink. And the first thing I'm going to focus on is family naming. So with my content standard, I am one of those people that will name everything to my standards. So BG, BIM Guru, essentially is my company standard. I use this so it's easier for me to tell when someone's using something in my projects I template for them that's not within my standard, because as we know, families don't always mix well with other families. They don't always get along. There's different standards that come from other types of families, and often model managers will need to stay on top of this, and a prefix is a good way to identify this. But often my clients will come to me with a template and say, I like BG and all, but my company is, say, ID. I want to be ID instead. So I have to go and replace all of these. Now I'm not going to go and rename them one by one, too slow. So in BIMlink, I'm just going to boot this up, and we're going to use one of the pre-configured links, and we're just going to make a few changes to it. So you can see already you get little guides in BIMlink, which is great. So there's already a lot of help for new users. But if you do know what you're doing, typically you can just start a new link. And you can make an absolutely fresh one by category or even based on a schedule in your model, but you'll see there's a lot of pre-configured links, and these aren't just single links, these are sets of links. So you can see a lot of things set up here that people can use. So it's pretty impressive just how much comes out of the box already. In my case, I'm using one under project standards. It's going to be project standards, rename types, and you'll see little descriptions about the elements as well. Sometimes you can do what's called an instance link, and sometimes a type link. It depends on how you're interacting with the elements. Because I'm dealing with family types here, in this case, I'm not going to be interacting at an instance level, on a type level instead. But if you were doing something like a wall link, you could sometimes do an instance-based link instead. So I'm going to go next. And you'll see that we've got a lot of stuff already pre-configured here. So if I go to the link settings, we can see already So we're getting a preview of what's going to be coming out of the link properties. We can see what properties are being interrogated. So you have the opportunity to add more data. You can see it's picking up pretty much every piece of data available in my model. So it's very intuitive. And there's also deeper things you can go into as well, such as project information and link properties. And depending on the category you're dealing with, you may get more. For example, in the case of doors, you can interrogate the to and from properties. I'm just going to limit down the categories a little bit just to make the amount of data I'm going through just a little bit more manageable. I think in this case, I may need to search for one. So I'm just going to turn off this hide unchecked. And I'm just going to focus on casework. So I'm just going to add all my casework, and I can see all my families available now, and also their type names. If I go into filter, I can make sure, first of all, that the element is actually editable and that it must pass all the filters. In this case, I'm just going to say the type name must begin with BG. So I'm only dealing with my specific families. In this case, this will exclude some things like the model in place families that I'm not going to change. And at that point, you can also change the sorting as well. But I'm pretty happy with this, and I can see a preview. I could see a preview. I think in this case, I may need to finish to see it. But now we have a link available. I'm going to export this.
Actually, hey, Gavin, real quick. I think you got to go back and fix your filters on the.
Yeah, I think I had a filter on, didn't I? So, that one's okay, right? Include, I think it should have some elements remaining.
Yeah, just go ahead and do that.
Oh, okay, yeah, gotcha. Cool, thanks.
Yep.
And then, sorry, I'll export again now that I've updated those properties. And when I open this file, we should see a fairly heavily pre-prescribed file. So you can see it's already quite navigable. A lot of other programs, say Dynamo, don't give you a very clean readout. You can also see which properties aren't changeable. Obviously, I'm not going to go and change the name of the category in Revit because that's not really possible. Well, it's not possible in a safe way. And you can also see the element IDs, which is sort of like the handle that you pass back to an element. I'm just going to go and do a find and replace. I'm just going to say that BG is now ID. Replaced all. So you can see that you've got access to, obviously, the things you would usually be accessing in Excel like any other program, but you can access the power of that manipulation. I'm going to close Excel, and I'm just going to import that link. It's going to prompt a dialog that shows me anything that's going to change. So that's what I really like about the tools as well. They give you a lot of feedback on what's going to happen. You're not necessarily pressing a blind run script button and hoping it's all going to turn out okay. The link I'm showing you here is accessing quite a lot of elements at the moment, so it takes a little bit longer, but some of these links are less than a second to run. I just started off with a relatively intense one, and the next ones I'm going to show you a little bit quicker. But essentially it's going to go and highlight anything that's changed. So I can see in this case all these IDs are yellow, and it's actually going to go to the detail of what's changed as well, where it is in Excel. So a lot of feedback. If I import at this point, you can see we've just went and manipulated all those. So a relatively simple link, but I could go and expand that to all the families in the entire project and just run that across multiple families, or I could go and manipulate that Excel data in much more complex ways, or literally just do a straight rename of the element. So a little simple but powerful thing to start with. Now, another thing I'm going to start showing too is actually something that Ideate is the only tool I have that can do, which is object styles. So in my projects, all my categories have a lot of subcategories available, usually starting with BG as well. And sometimes I separate them with dashes as well, just because I use a specific case breakdown for data manipulation. Sometimes my clients have come to me and said, I want that prefix off, and I want to turn all those dashes into spaces. So that's already relatively possible, but quite timely to set up. And on top of that, I have a line weight standard. All my projection lines begin at 3. It's the lowest line weight because 1 and 2 I reserve for hatch patterns. Some clients weren't really on the ball when it came to picking that standard up in Revit. It's a little bit of an unknown behavior. So some people want every line weight to essentially go down by 2. So in this case, I need to use Ideate Bimlink to control this data. So I'm going to go to Ideate Bimlink again. And I'm going to be using another link in this case, the project standards object style link. I'm going to go project standard object styles, which will give me all the properties of all the subcategories and categories in my model, which is really powerful. I can take things out if I don't want to see them. In this case, I'll probably just keep everything for now. And again, just going to create the link. So this time I didn't make any changes to it. It's just as it comes. So already that work's just been done for me. And I can see a massive table now of all my categories, subcategories, their colors in an RGB syntax, and their projection and their cut weights as well. So pretty powerful already. Eventually I'll get down and find all my BG styles. So in this case, I'm just going to do a big find and replace. And a little trick for people that use Excel, if they don't know it, is you can do a find and replace on something with nothing, just to get rid of it. That just gets rid of all my BG underscores, they're just gone. And I can just say replace all my spaces with a dash with a space. And done, that's literally all my names fixed up. I mean, to do that manually would take an absurdly long amount of time. From there, I can just go and manipulate my projection weight. I'll just move that so I can see it a bit more easily. And I think my line weight cut. So I'm just going to use two like sort of dud columns off to the side here. So I'm just going to hide these temporarily. And I'm just going to say that this is equal, I'll make this my cut column. So I'll say this -2, and I'll say this -2. Now some elements won't have a cut weight, and in this case, it's going to put a 0 in these fields, but notice they're dashed out, which means they're not technically editable. So I think in this case, I need that to be that -2. There we go. And of course, because I'm in Excel, I can just autofill. And I should have all my values I need. And then with those, I can just copy these two columns, right click and paste its values. And then it's just as simple as finding anything that's a non-compliant line weight and just taking out its value. The 0, I think should be with nothing. -1 should be with nothing. And -2 should be with nothing. I'm not sure if I even have to do that. I'm pretty sure I can just introduce that data as uneditable and it just won't be able to make the change anyway, but I like to be safe. And now all my line weights here will be dropped by 2, essentially from the previous cut weight. So I can just save this. And I can re-import this object styles table. And this should update not only the names, but also the projected and the cut weights as well. And this is a really useful task. I actually have like a table I keep just on the side, ready to link back into Revit based on my standard object style setup. So it just saves me so much time being able to run this task project by project. Now here and there might be a couple of values I left in there that aren't changeable, but obviously it gives me a little warning report and I can go and check maybe why that's the case. But I mean, if 3 of them weren't changeable, it might be because of a non-editable family possibly, but otherwise we look like we're doing pretty well. I can see here, I can just have a look at my descriptions and I can see here, I think it's a read-only field here. Revit properties read-only, so I can go and sort of manually audit these things after. But otherwise, done. That's how quick it was, right? Super quick, super easy. I go check out one of my categories. You can see all my names have been fixed up, all my projections and my cuts have been dropped by 2. So it's a very quick and easy task. And a trick I use as well is if you bring all your families into a project, you can change all these properties at a global level and then resave those families back out, rather than going in family by family from a library structure and doing it. So it saves me a lot of time. Now some standards are more model-based with Ideate, with Vimlink. You might think Excel, how can we do model-based things? Well, we can still audit model-based conditions. So if I go into my GA plan in this particular building, we can see here there's a few grids. And for some reason, this grid's not being dimensioned. So I can't actually create a dimension to that grid. And most Revit users will know this is probably because this grid's not at a very good angle. It may look like it's straight, but it's probably not. So if I go and check the accuracy dimension style here, I can see I'm dealing with a number that's not very friendly, unlike this grid over here, which is at 90 degrees. And these can be really big problems later on in design when you've set out hundreds of walls from here. So a common auditing task is to find these. Now, obviously I could go and put a dimension on every single pair of grids and look at them all manually, but it's a pretty big waste of time. So instead I'm going to use Vimlink. I'm going to go to Ideate, Vimlink. And in this case, I'm going to be doing some quality control. I'm going to be using one of their quality control standards setups. I'm going to go into quality control, and I think it's QC grids, yes. So this is going to go and essentially check, in this case, I believe, the angles of the grids. So in this case, you can see you get this XY survey line angle. So assuming your project is at the internal north or to a consistent angle to it, you can actually audit the ones that are off. Now, at the moment, you'll see they're all saying 180 or 270. Obviously, there's a degree of rounding we're going to need to introduce here. Sometimes in Revit, you won't be able to get down to this level of precision. But in this case, if I just export this, we're actually going to have this level of precision hiding in the figures. So if I go, I think in this case, yep, there we go. And we can start searching, and there we go. We can see grid point 2 is at a bad angle, and I believe another one around here should be as well. There we go, point 1. So we've found the 2 grids that are at offending angles, and now we can just go back to our model with this knowledge and go and check those 2 grids and see what the problem is. So I found that a really interesting use of Ideate BIMlink, and I have tried to build Dynamo scripts to do this before. It's a very difficult task. You essentially have to find the most common orientations of grids, and it's very timely. This was a really handy use for me, and it actually helped me find this in a few client models before as well. So a nice handy little QC check. And that QC section has a lot of quality control based links as well. I just thought I'd show that one because it's quite intriguing. A really handy one as well is to get all the view information out of the model and review a lot of aspects of those views. So this one's under the health check section, which contains a few things that you would typically maybe use in order to assess the health of the model and potentially feed some data into like a dashboard. I think that's what sort of the intent of some of these is. So I'm going to go to healthcare views, and this is going to export just a massive link of all the data about my views. So we haven't had to build a schedule. This is all set up for us. It's a pretty big link. There's quite a lot of things that we're assessing, really all the major properties of a view that we might care about. But of course, there's a lot of other things we can find as well, even based on, I think, sheet properties of that view, and also just more data in my model as well. So we can always remove and move up and down, change the order if we wish, and we can also filter all the data we're receiving as well. So we do get a lot of intervention along the way, but it's nice just not to have to make this ourselves every single time. You also maybe get an idea of some of the more interesting elements in the model based on their IDs as well. Sometimes you might get some items that are present in a model from the start, and usually you don't want to interact with those too much. So you might get some cues on certain elements too, but Ideate does sort of shield you from some of those behaviors as well, just without us knowing about it, which is great. So I'm just going to export this healthcare views. And then I'm just going to open this up, and we'll get a whole bunch of information about our views. Now, in this case, I'm going to be reviewing view template assignment. I'm going to find the views that don't have templates assigned, which is, it's possible in Revit, but it's still quite timely. I find here it's much easier. One thing I really like about the way this is set up is I might just firstly just hide a few things. So I'm just going to go, and I'm just going to show you at the end of this table that this tool actually does bring in a few control tables. These are essentially driving some data validation fields. For example, I have a list of all my view templates, schedules, phases, all sorts of things. And what this has done is this has become a little data validation list for certain cells. So the tool actually comes and tells you in the view template field that this is a validated field. So in Excel, if people don't know, under data validation, you can delimit things based on ranges or lists or various criteria, such as only being decimals, dates. This is how you can lock down what's available in a cell. But Ideate just does this for you, which is really cool. So from here, you can just come and say, oh, I've got a 14 series view here, no template. Well, I think this probably needs to be an RCP. And then you can just start batch populating. Some of those missing areas, you can see I've got a dummy view there. That doesn't really matter. I've got some elements locked down by view templates, or sometimes not requiring a view template. But in this case, I've got some more here, so some 20 series views. So it's a really high-level auditing tool that I find really quick and easy just to assess. You can even start spotting things that are named incorrectly. So I can say, okay, well, this is obviously wrong. This is amenity 1, elevation 1, 2, 3, 4. I know this is meant to be actually A, B, C, D. So you can start doing little audits of view names as well. So you can sort of do more than one task at the same time. There's probably smarter ways to populate some of this data than what I'm doing. I'm just doing it sort of the manual way. But in this case,
while you're making those edits, just a couple of things I want to mention. So in BIMlink, there's a checkbox that says export with drop-down values, and that's what generates the validated data lists. And you can see Gavin starting to swap out or assign view templates. Anything that's in gray is not allowed to be edited, and that could be in this case because these other fields are being driven by view templates. It just all depends on what it is. And these darker grays with the hatching in there represents that those particular values don't apply to those particular sets of elements. And so the data is very well separated, but basically anything in white is fair game to be edited. And if you make any mistakes and you accidentally edit something that is in gray, when you import it, BIMlink won't kill the entire process. It won't allow you to make the change for that one element, but it will allow you to continue on with everything else.
Yeah, precisely. So there's a lot of control and communication in the tables, which is great, and a lot of other things like true false values, which you can just populate with a true or false. So it's very easy for users to understand. There's not really too much, programming language on display here, which is great too. It's all very raw and Revit based. Now that I've made some of those changes, I can obviously just go and you know the drill by now. Just re-importing that, and it should bring up a little table telling me all the changes that are going to be made. In this case, mostly view templates. But in this case, you can see it's finding those assignments of templates, and it also, I think, had a name that I changed as well. So very powerful. So that's sort of what I wanted to show you with BIMlink. I'll just find a couple of those views that are now assigned properly. For example, this RCP. In this case, my standard is it's very important that the view templates are used properly, because one standard I use is I make sure that my sorting is locked to my view templates and my view creation process assigns the template. So if someone misses this or changes this view to a different type later on, obviously the view creation doesn't apply the template. I found that Ideate's really useful just for finding out models where that hasn't necessarily worked out. But we'll move on to Ideate Explorer now, which is probably my favorite one just because it's such an innovative tool. So I'm just going to go to my basic sample project. So it's a little bit easier to see what we're doing in a smaller context of a model, but you can apply this to any scale of model in my experience. I'm going to boot up Explorer, and as the name indicates, we're really exploring all the elements in our model. So immediately, we just have access to every single element in the entire project, not the entire view, the entire project. So that was pretty quick, right? I mean, there's probably, what can we see, about almost 4,000 elements just in this tiny little model here. So you can imagine how much data that's just drawn upon just by opening. Now, I'm just looking at my entire project right now, but let's say I want to focus on a particular type of casework. Well, I can see that once I go down a category, I get my types. From there, I can see my benches. I can go down to the point of type and then instance. So we have very granular review available of our data. And we also just have data available straight away. Let's say I want to select all my casework and furniture at the same time. Well, how would you usually do that in Revit? You wouldn't really be able to. The more useful, the more common process someone might do is this terrible one where you go like this, filter, casework, furniture. I mean, obviously that's highly ineffective. And at the moment, I can't actually select some of my furniture because it's not a design option. So we're actually bypassing a lot of that tedium through the Explorer already. But we're obviously just taking out the time that it takes to do this, which in a very large model, as you know, is a very long amount of time. You'll be waiting a while and probably getting a coffee. So in this case, we really do just have much quicker and easier access to our elements, and we can start interrogating them in more detail now. So you can see that that's just bypassed. Even just a very common thing that people do in Revit, so it breaks bad habits as well. If I go to a work sharing based model, such as this one here, notice that Ideate just changed in my session, so it knows I'm in a different model now. It's not like something like Dynamo that always has to point to a document actively and remains pointed to it. It follows you, so it's very cool. As well as this, I think there's even a dockable command here, which is very cool. I found that pretty neat. So very useful if you just want to keep it on the side, just at the ready. But in this case, let's just, instead of by category, let's go by work set, because this is a work shared model. Well, now in this case, I can check out my user created work sets. I do have my view and project standard work sets as well. A lot of people probably won't know what they are or that they even exist. I'm just going to turn off my Revit links so we can just see non-linked elements. I'm turning off my facade and my structure and my site just to see what's in my model. But I've already pretty much went and pre-assigned everything to the right work set, but it's really useful for finding things that are on the wrong work set. In this case, I've pretty much isolated everything on my architecture work set, which is pretty much anything architectural that doesn't fit under another set of areas. And you can see that I can very quickly just go and grab all my elements by work set. So that's very quick, right? We just selected almost 1,500 elements in less than a second based on a common property they have. But I can obviously get more granular and start to review things that may be on the wrong work set possibly. Or I can just go back to my entire project by category, and I can just go and start looking at the work sets things are on just by looking at them as a blanket. I can say, is all my casework on the right work set? And I can see here it's all on FF&E. Some of it's not accessible because it's in a group, but in this case, there are ways you can filter that out. But it's a really great way to just check work set assignment. I actually used Ideate Explorer to classify this entire model once I made it work shared, and I think it took me about probably 5 to 10 minutes just to pick everything in the work sets they should be on. but I really couldn't do this task without Ideate Explorer. It's such a lifesaver. Anyway, we'll come back to the smaller project so you can focus on it in a bit more detail. One thing I find really cool is you can actually select by view filter. I mean, how cool is that? You can't do that in Revit. You can build selection filters, but you can't build a view filter by selection. So I can say I want everything in my model that knows that it's concrete. I might just stop docking Ideate Explorer. I can say, okay, here's all my elements that I've assigned a property telling them they're concrete. I can start auditing too. I can say, well, why is this the water in my lake telling me it's made of concrete? I can go and say, oh, okay, my lake is concrete. And I can start to just really review down things in my project as well and start to find properties that maybe aren't correct. So I find this can be a good visual way to interrogate what a filter is doing as well. I use this in my content standard and my template quite a lot just to make sure that my properties are correct. I can also see what I've told to be loose, so what is loose in my model. Again, it's a Boolean, but I can see, for example, my downlights think they're loose. So in that case, I can go and say, oh, okay, it thinks it's both fixed and loose. Well, that's obviously not correct. So I can start to audit some of those properties, but also just being able to select things down by filter can be quite handy. Say you're trying to talk to a structural engineer and you have a placeholder set of structure in your model, or maybe you might be able to use Ideate to filter all those elements down at the same time and just navigate your model more quickly and more easily and just show what matters without relying on work sets, which might be incorrect, whereas a view filter is obviously much more absolute. So pretty cool. Beyond that, I guess like a really cool tab I really like as well is the warnings tab. Anyone that's done auditing in Revit will know that warnings are much more important than people think they are. Most people will see a warning and just say okay and move on if they're allowed to. Otherwise, they'll probably just say delete checked and delete the element causing the warning, which is even worse. But if you do need to review the warnings, it can be quite a slow process without Ideate. So if you go manage warnings, you can start looking at the warning report. Okay, let's go look at one of these warnings. Show me the element. It takes quite a long time. And once you want to do something, you have to close the warning report. So it's very clunky, very slow, and a lot of the time it's very hard to really visually discern which warnings matter. Ideate's went to the effort of showing you all the elements triggering a warning in your model by the warning type, and they've pre-assigned a classification to it as well. For example, identical instances in the same place is a critical warning because you're going to be double counting those elements. Someone might tag the wrong one and delete the right one later and lose all the tags. There's a lot of things that can go wrong in this case. So in this case, I can actually just isolate these elements and see what they are. And I can start to interrogate them warning by warning. I can see where those problems are occurring, which is really useful. And it's quite a few occurring over here. So I know this is a little assembly, or a model group in this case. So I've actually got a model group on top of a model group. So in this case, this would usually be quite a challenging situation if I've already documented my project. Because chances are one of these is tagged and one of them's not. So I wanted to show another tool that I usually use in combination with warning checking, which is Ideate Smart Delete. So in this case, I do have two groups on top of each other here. So I've got two elements and I don't know which one's holding the tags. I could manually go and check this, but what a waste of time when I've got just a confident tool that can do it for me. So I'm going to go to Smart Delete. So this is an Ideate app. It's a much more specific or dedicated purpose, but it's very good at what it does. So in this case, I'm going to select, I might need to select, I think, pre-select one of these elements before I Smart Delete. And it should tell me what's going to happen if I delete this element. It'll give me a fairly detailed report. So I can see in this case, I'm going to lose a whole bunch of model elements. So that's okay, because all I'm losing is the model elements, no tags, no dimensions. So I know this is the right element. Delete. And I could also select both of them at the same time instead and get a two-stage report. It's really up to you what you're checking. But now I can go and check the original one. And sure enough, we're going to see that we are also going to delete a dimension and 4 element tags, in this case, element keynotes. So we can see as a result, we've deleted the right one. And I haven't really seen any other tool that does this. It's a really interesting feature. And I find that Ideate does think quite far outside the box sometimes. They've been around with Revit for a while, so I guess it's given them time to really look at how users work in Revit and the challenges they face. And these sort of creative solutions are quite interesting, I find, to really look at how things can be used. Similarly, I wanted to show quite an abstract feature of Ideate Explorer that does quite a left field thing, which is to look at the element keynotes in the model. I believe in this case, if I go back to explore entire project by category, and in this case, I believe I think I'll probably just do it this way. I think you probably can limit down by model category. I'm just going to save myself a bit of time and just go down to keynote tags and go to element keynotes. And you can actually check the properties that the keynote is extracting. So if you know there's a code in your model that's obsolete, say this CCR ceiling cornice, I can just go CCR. And I think in this case, I should be able to filter down based on the search criteria. And now I can see that my CCRs and also my wall sweep itself is the problem element. I can even go to particular views and double click this element, and I can go to the location of the tag as well. So it's pretty powerful. It's something that, I don't really know any other way to do, and it's very interesting. I found it very unique when I've got certain codes, especially user keynotes, where people have made things up that don't actually comply to a particular standard. So quite useful. Beyond here, there's also a really useful tool called Ideate Query, which sort of acts as an extension to the Explorer as well. So in this case, let's say I'm just going to look at my doors. I'm going to click on this little Ideate Query box. And one thing often you'll need to do with doors is figure out if they've been flipped or changed in handing, because this will impact the door handing set of the hardware. And there's not really, I don't know any automatic way to detect this, but there's a lot of sort of data-based ways to check. So let's just say I want to look at whether it's been flipped. So I can say, is it facing flipped, hand flipped, work plane flipped? In this case, I care about facing flipped, and I also care about hand flipped as well. And what I'll get is essentially a little breakdown of the combinations of those two fields, which is very cool. So I know that by default, all my doors are left-hand, non-reverse, but obviously I can tell there, well, these would be my right hands if I selected these particular elements, or if I had a double true, then I'd know that they're back to their default facing. So I can say that I want to see anything that's a combination of these two. And now I know that I have selected all the elements that have been at least flipped or at least mirrored, but not both. Very quick. And BIMlink could be used in a similar way to interrogate those properties and push back a data all in one workflow. Or I could just be in here and go and populate a Boolean that tells me that. So it's some really abstract and interesting uses for Explorer, but it really just gives you control over your model. When you've got this tool, you feel so in control of your model. You know where to find everything, you know where it is. You're no longer saying, which view is this tag in? No idea. Let's go and open every single view and find it. No more of that. You can actually find it much more easily thanks to Explorer. So definitely one of my favorite tools, just in Revit in general. But I think off the suite, that's the one that definitely has saved me the most times. So another great tool for me, because I'm a really intense standards manager, and I realize I think I've been jumping past the slides, but I did have a slide for Ideate Explorer, so sorry for that. The next one is Ideate Style Manager, and I typically use this for maintaining my standards, seeing if there's more than one standard that's doing the same thing, or taking away a standard that's not being used in the model, doing a purge of an element that may not be purgeable. So I'm going to go back to the model. And in this case, I'll probably go back to my big model, just where there's a few more standards in use. And I'm going to open up Style Manager. And for any model managers that haven't seen this, it's a very satisfying tool to see, because you essentially have a massive style control kit here. It's very impressive, again, user interfaces, but you can see a lot of things that don't give you a lot of control in Revit by default. For example, filters. You can't purge unused on filters. Here, you not only can you purge unused if they're not being used, you can also see where they're being used as well. So if I want to just maybe analyze, I'll find just a limited set of filters. Let's say I want to see which views I'm using my fire rating filters, and I'm going to analyze them. And I can see now that I'm using the 2-hour fire rating rule in my view template for petition plans. I can start to interrogate. I can see that I'm not actually using these other filters at all, and I can see that they're being used on 0 views. I can filter down to things that aren't being used. I can say, okay, there's actually quite a lot of things I'm not using, at least on an element. Maybe it's there for a reason, but if I don't want them to be there, I can just very simply just delete them. And they're gone. It tells me what was happened. So immediately that should be something that's very recognizably powerful to a model manager that hasn't had access to this before. You have other things like view templates. I mean, knowing how many views have a view template assigned to them is critical. You can see if maybe your GA templates aren't on any views. Why is that? Or maybe it's because someone's not doing the standards properly. Or maybe your company's made a template that doesn't actually have any purpose. But I can see here the views that it's being applied to. Very powerful. I've got the view template as an element type, and I've got the views as elements. Viewports, obviously something else that's quite commonly doubled up. I can see this title with line. What's that? That's not meant to be there, so I can just get rid of it. So I have a lot more access to things. As well as this, sometimes you might have things that do the same thing by accident. A great place this will happen maybe is line patterns. I believe I've got some duplicates here. And well, it turns out my center style is exactly the same as my level style. I can see here that one of my legacy styles that I was working on before I started BIM Guru, behind the scenes, the GC style, which didn't quite make it to the past the chopping board, the Gavin Crump style, is sneaking its way in. So I can start to see why is this in the model? Maybe I just want to analyze a few of these things and make sure they're not being used by anything. But essentially you can see that 2 of them are green, 2 of them are red, and it's telling me these 2 things are duplicates. Now I could go and delete them, but what if they're in use already? Well, in this case, there's a problem. There's a level and a center style. Maybe I want to turn my levels into centers. Everywhere they're referenced, in this case, in levels. Well, instead, I can merge. I can merge this into the center style. And it's going to go on and reassign those 2 assignments in Revit. Now that's super powerful. We can cross a lot of different places that these things can be used using this tool. Super strong, because it's not always as simple as just swapping over a 2D line. For example, that line style was inside the properties of a level, so much harder to access. I can see here, obviously, this just isn't being used, so I can just delete it. So you can see here just a toolkit that gives you much more depth and access into the areas of your model that can be quite difficult. I can even see I've got like duplicate light styles, so the materials have the same properties, quite surprising, but I guess in this case, a couple of them are just different for the sake of having them, like fire-rated plasterboard versus standard plasterboard, the same code, but just a different context. So it leads me to things where I can actually question, is it necessary for me to have some of these things in my model? But this is just, again, probably one of my favorites too. I really love just how much access and control you have over your standard, especially if you're modifying a company template. This is a must-use app, I find. Without this, you just don't have visibility of everything in your model or in your template. So very powerful. Now I can show you every single thing here, but I think you get the idea of roughly how the app works, and each sort of respective part of it is very similar in how it behaves. But you can see that we're getting some new things. I think this came in quite recently, text and fonts. So not just text, but font styles, pretty abstract, and also dimension types and arrowheads. So arrowheads, again, is something quite hard to access through the API. But Ideate has went and done it for us, luckily. So I can see there I've got Arial, but I've also got all the other fonts that I'm not using as well. So very powerful. So I think for the last section, I was just going to focus on a couple of the Ideate apps. I'm just going to show a more detailed workflow that you can undertake to renumber all the doors in your entire project by room, which is something that, again, you can do in Dynamo, but it's a very big workflow, takes a long time, and it's computationally quite heavy. I was very surprised how easy it was to do this in Ideate apps when I came to it, especially given this was the first workflow that I built in Dynamo when I was learning Dynamo. So I really do appreciate how much work is involved in this process. So if I just jump back into my advanced sample project, I have already went and just pre-validated the to from direction of all my doors. So I do know that this door does belong to this cupboard because I've told it to point the other way. So that is one thing that, it's quite hard to do that with an app in general, just because it's usually a very visual thing. I'm not sure what happened to that conjuring cupboard over there. So in this case, there is that first step that usually I would recommend doing. But the destination now is to actually check which numbered room it belongs to, and also which number of that room the door is. So if a room has more than one door going into it, for example, this one here, I think both of these doors belong to the cafeteria. In this case, I do want this to be like 1, 2, or whichever order a workflow would assign to it. And then I'm going to combine these fields into a mark, and then I'm going to deconstruct this mark using BIMlink into a few sets of parameters that I've set up. For example, I have a mark, but I also have the related to and from room, and also the number the door is. And I've got the mark field. So I'm going to populate the mark using the Ideate app, and then I'm going to deconstruct the data in Excel from BIMlink. So a nice workflow that sort of closes everything out and shows a couple of tools used together. So I'm going to use renumber. And this tool does a lot of renumbering tasks. I'm just going to show one specific task it does. And it'll show you the depth of the tool, I think. So already you can see different sort of path methods. Like if anyone that's done a renumbering task in Dynamo will know that using a spline or a crossing line or a proximity line is definitely something that works. You can also do a spline by vertex. Every time your line kinks, it will measure what's at that point. So you have a little bit more control. That was quite a creative method I'd never even thought about computationally. So I was pretty impressed with that. We're going to make a new setting. And we can just do doors for the sample project. I might just make a new one in this case. So we're going to use 4 doors, and I'll just call this my rule set. Great name. So in this case, we're targeting the mark parameter. You can also say to ignore particular parameters as well. So in this case, if it is true, then the element will be excluded. So you do have a filtering ability there. But at this point, you can start adding constants and increments and fields. So I'm going to add a constant, which is just door dot. And then I'm going to add a field. So I'm going to add, in this case, the related room property. So I'm going to find the to room. So I'm going to find room. So this is the room 2 property that it's drawing on already. I'm going to get the room number. In this case, I just have to give it a name. So I'll just say RMN, room number. And you can also use from room as an optional option as well, whether you, depending on whether you have a property that tells the room that it should think about the from instead of the to. So that's an alternative, I guess, of how you could alternate your door facing direction using the tool instead of actually getting the to from right. And then after this, I'll just have the number, which is going to be an increment. I might just add a constant as well. I just want to have a dot, and I'll just say okay, and then I'm just going to add an increment. In this case, I'm just going to call this dn for door number, starting at 1, increment size of 1, and I can do increments based on certain aspects as well. I'm going to increment per room. And if you have a door with just 1, you can exclude it altogether, but I am going to include it because I want this door to be like door 1. And I can see now I get a little preview of what it's going to look like, so that's perfect. I'm going to save and close. And in this case, what do I call this thing again? It was my rule set, wasn't it? My rule set. So I'm going to OK that. And now I'm going to run this. So I believe it works on the elements you see in the view. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sash. I think if you do auto number by view, yeah, there we go. So that will do all the elements I see in my plan. So you do get some control over how much you modify. I'm just going to start numbering, and it's going to show me everything it's deciding. I do have an opportunity to reverse the orders as well, and also swapping around some to froms, which will end up telling this element in future that it should be reversed. But for now, I'm going to accept the changes. I believe it should have just went and updated those. Cool, so there we go. So now all my doors are numbered. I can just check here. This is cafeteria 1.2, 1.1. So I can see it's worked for multiple doors. And now I can just go and do a quick link using Ideate BIM link to deconstruct these values into parameters. Now in this case, I'm going to build a link from scratch. I'm not going to use one of the predefined ones. I'm going to do a new link by category. I'm going to go get doors. In this case, it's an instance link. I will have to give this a name. In this case, I'll just say.
Or Gavin, down below, click on custom definition.
Definition, right? Yep, yep. Otherwise, I think that must go and draw on another source. And now I could do a type link as well, but these are instance properties. So in this case, I'm going to be drawing firstly on the mark, because that is the field I want to deconstruct. After this, I'm going to need the related room to and a related room from. I think in this case, I may even be able to search. I think this probably searches on the left. Perfect. So useful. Related room to. In this case, I'm ignoring the from, but I could go and draw that value out using the from room number. Actually, maybe I'll just do that. That probably makes more sense. I can just show you how that works too. So if I go to room, I can go and draw on the to room number. So I can just take to room number and I can go from room. I can take the from room number as well. So now I have two from, so I can just transpose that data. And then finally, I just need the door number in this case. So I think, yeah, I've got this custom number parameter. And these are the elements that go into my tag itself. So this is a little bit more important. So I'm going to say done. And in this case, I'm going to export my doors, open my file. And in this case, the first one is quite straightforward. I can just go and take everything. Sometimes some rooms may not have a to from, so this is a good way to sort of visually audit that as well. Paste as values. And in this case, I can just go and transpose, I think using the left function. Oh, sorry, the right function. So I'm from here, I'm going to take the, in this case, the first character to the right in Excel. So if you know some formulas in Excel, this is obviously where you can get a little bit more powerful. I think I just copied that. Oops. Oh, no, there we go. Seems to, oh yeah, because I only did one floor, of course. So I can only see one level of doors. So at this point, I can save this, import my doors. And you can see all those properties are being detected, changing, and bang, my doors are updated and they have all their properties populated. So I should have my to from, which is now accessible as a native parameter, not a hidden parameter. And I also have the numbers as per the doors. So it's a really handy little workflow. And once you've sort of set those links up, you can just reuse them again. And I find that's very quick to work with if that's a little standard. This is actually how I numbered all the doors in my model in the end in the actual version of this model. So super handy workflow. I think probably just the last thing I want to show, I won't show the entire workflow, but just a tool that I really appreciated was the View Alignment app, because it has a great little user interface that will show you, I think I need to go to a view that actually is alignable or similar enough to be aligned to a set of views. If I open up the Align tool whilst I'm here, although actually I might need to be on the sheet, just correct me if I'm wrong, Sash, I think probably the sheet.
Yeah, that's, yep. Yeah, we did that on purpose to, otherwise it'll try to query up the whole model and it'll go really slow.
Yeah, makes sense. So if I'm in this sheet on a zone 1 scope box in my petition plans, well, in this case, I can go and align up some views, and it's automatically just sort of picking out similar views that it makes the most sense to relate to. So if I go to level 1 and check out my petition plan, I think in this case, look at that, it's poorly aligned. But I get a little preview of the view that I'm referencing, and now I can just go and find all those views, or I can even just isolate them by property. I might need to be case sensitive. I think in this case it's still triggering them, maybe just because it's matching the word zone. But in this case, I can just go and take these other views that relate.
Oh, I think you got to put in quotes.
Quotes, okay.
Yeah, just like you would, I believe.
Yeah, syntax, cool. I like that. That's very cool. There we go. I can just go and say line up all these views, and it's going to go and fix up those view alignments for me. So very quick, very easy, and a task that usually probably everyone's got some sort of Dynamo workflow for it. Chances are it's sometimes fast, sometimes not. But you can see that was very easy. But what I really appreciated was just the thought they put into showing you that view before you realigned it. I thought that was a really nice little touch that sort of showed that that thought process that they put into their workflow. So that's probably, I'm probably almost out of time. So that was probably good timing. I think that was probably everything that I wanted to show. Obviously, there's a lot more I can show you, but hopefully, I guess I've shown you a lot of ideas for how you can use Ideate apps if you're already using them. Otherwise, some things that might encourage you to explore them further. But I think we've got a few closing slides. So I guess my personal closing thoughts, as you can tell, like I really do think Ideate Software is a must-have set of tools for efficient Revit users that want to save time in their day and for their company. Obviously, the return on investment in some of the workflows I showed you is pretty immense. There is just so many tools and features that I didn't have time to cover inside these tools, but I definitely encourage you to explore them. I'm still finding new uses for them every day. It's like having my own little mini Dynamo off to the side that can do so much more than I can do with Dynamo. So it's been a really fun set of tools to explore and find use of, especially in the context of my own business, where my time is actually my money. So I do understand that return on investment challenge. So definitely encourage you to check them out. And I don't think you'll be disappointed by any means. So I think I'll pass it back to Sash just to finish up with the Q&A and just some action items. But thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. This was awesome. I think you covered the essence of a lot of the challenges that you folks deal with kind of on a day-to-day basis. And one thing I want to point out to you, because I recognize some of the names on today's call, is while this was kind of an architectural based focus, all of our tools really work for all industries of the architecture, engineering, construction, building operations side of things. And like for example, in BIMLink, we can also create new elements if you want to, new sheets, new rooms, new areas, new spaces, right? We have all sorts of workflows, for that. We had a question from one of the audience members about, how can we maybe take some of this information out, using Power BI, right? And so, one of the things about BIMLink that's really helpful is you saw Gavin take this data out to Excel, and then open Excel and modify it. We actually have a lot of templates that we ship, Excel-based templates that we ship with the product, and we also have some special ones that are for BIMLink customers only. But what's really compelling about it is if you were to continue to take your Revit data and export it out, let's say daily, to a particular Excel file, we actually don't overwrite the entire Excel file. We just overwrite the data that's inside of it if that particular worksheet matches. So for example, if Gavin had a Excel file with multiple tabs, one was called doors, the other was called windows, the other was called walls, he could write that information out and it won't overwrite the entire file, it'll just overwrite the particular tabs. And what's great about that is
even when you're doing a few audits, one per week, you could rename the tab to the date, build up a multi-review table.
Exactly. And so the nice thing about that is if, let's say, you did have a Power BI template set up to read a particular Excel file, no worries. You can have it all set up. And then when you overwrite the data, you'll just get the latest and greatest information. And we actually have a quantity takeoff template that actually gets installed with BIMlink. It's basically a series of pivot tables. And we just overwrite the data in there with the raw, ugly looking data that comes out of BIMlink, but then it looks prettier once the pivot table summarizes, that information for you so that you can kind of take this out. We actually have, we also have automation for BIMlink that you can actually set up as an automated task to take a series of links and push that information out to a designated Excel file. So you could say, hey, run it at 1 a.m. or at 1300 hours, whatever, or I should say, at 1300, whatever it is, and say I want to run this thing, or actually I should say it's at 1, isn't it? Hour 1 for you guys. So it just all depends. So you can actually set those up as automated tasks. A couple other things too that came up, does Explore, or even for that matter, any other tools, speed differ, if you have a cleanly built model versus a poorly built model? And I would say to answer that, it just all kind of depends. Again, I guess one of the advantages, and maybe Gavin could attest to this because Gavin's is also a Dynamo guy. We've had to build in a lot of methods to really enhance performance with our software. So, BIMlink, if you just built it kind of out of the box, it would probably run very poorly. But we've had to do a lot of optimization to make it run faster. And the same thing with Ideate Explorer. And so while you could have a poor performing model, Explorer will actually run fine, even in a situation like that. And then, of course, when you go and manage warnings, as Gavin kind of pointed out, the importance of dealing with warnings, then your model should hopefully run faster. And, speaking of warnings, a question came up about the little bomb icons on Explorer. There's two kind of settings with warnings, and Gavin showed you kind of the warnings rankings, where he had high ranked warnings in red and medium ranked warnings in yellow and then low ranked warnings in green. You can customize those settings. So if you have certain warnings that you want to rank and say, hey, these sketches slightly off axis, that's a big deal to me. Well, you can change it from our default of kind of low ranked to medium ranked. But the first icon, the first kind of red bomb icon, means you have high ranked warnings in your model, and that's warning you to take care of those first and foremost. The second bomb icon in there represents you've exceeded your warnings threshold. So a lot of people have kind of rules like, 1 warning per 1 megabyte of file, or 100 warnings per 100 megabyte, whatever you set up as that threshold. So when you exceed it, you get that additional warning as well. And then lastly, the other thing I want to point out to you is for those of you that currently have Style Manager, you probably noticed that Gavin had more features. He had text, he had fonts, dimensions, arrowheads, filled regions, viewport types. Just want to let you know, on our website, just go ahead and go to our website and go to the free trial button. For those of you that are existing customers, you can download the latest version of Style Manager. We just published it a couple days ago, and you can get access to the latest and greatest. And of course, if you currently have a license, when you install it, you'll be fully updated. No need to relicense it. And of course, you can go to our website to download the trial, to download the latest one that Gavin's shown on the slide right there if you want to test out the software. And of course, you can reach out to me if you have any questions. You can reach out to support at Ideate Software. And if you have questions for Gavin, feel free to reach out to him as well. So,
Yeah, I
Gavin,
try to
any
be
final
fairly
thoughts?
contactable. Oh, sorry, I was going to say I try to be fairly contactable on LinkedIn, YouTube, yeah, AussieBIMGuru@gmail.com. So don't hesitate to reach out. I don't bite. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate it. Hope you guys learned some new things here. And there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot to show you there. And again, feel free to reach out to us if you have workflow related questions, even like Gavin was showing, and I loved it. He showed that example of using renumber to do his door stuff. And then he took the rest of the parameter data out using BIMlink to actually push in those values, which is actually great. And this is where Gavin, you remember when I saw your Dynamo workflow on
YouTube. Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And then I emailed Gavin. I was like, I have a BIMlink workflow. And so we kind of talked to each other about that and showed him how it can be done in
That's
BIMlink.
what we started, didn't we? I think that's what we started speaking about this presentation in general. Yeah,
Yeah, it was a long time ago. Yep, exactly. Yep, because BIMlink has immediate access to that information. And so, but just to go back to that real quickly, you could also set up renumber where you can take those other values and set them up and say, all right, get this door data and push it into this parameter, then set up another rule to push it into that other parameter. You can also do that if you didn't want to use BIMlink. So there's all these different ways of doing things. So Gavin, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
And thanks everyone for coming along too. And I look forward to seeing more of you in the future. And hope everyone has a happy holidays coming up soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Happy holidays. Thanks for your attendance. And this recording will be available on our website shortly. So we'll send out a link to everybody. Take care, and we'll hang out for a couple minutes in case other questions come in. Thanks, Gavin.
Oh, thank you.